Peru is getting its 9th president in 10 years. Keiko Fujimori is taking the reins more than 25 years after her father's polarising presidency. But the scars of that era still divide Peru. Will her government move beyond his legacy? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. It took 4 attempts over 15 years, but Keiko Fujimori has finally got Peru's top job. She's making history as the first woman to be elected president. Her victory makes Peru the latest in a string of Latin American countries to swing to the right. Fujimori defeated her left-wing rival by a narrow margin, and she'll govern over a divided country. Many people are sceptical she'll be able to unite Peru, as promised, worried that instead she will take after her father. The late former president, Alberto Fujimori, was convicted and imprisoned for human rights abuses and corruption. So, will she reject his legacy, or will his example guide her government? Will Keiko Fujimori become Peru's first leader in years to complete her term, or will her time in office be short-lived? We'll discuss all of this with our guests in a moment, but first this report from Ragas.
Peru is swearing in a new president, bringing back the Fujimori family to power. A political dynasty that has shaped Peru for more than 30 years. Keiko Fujimori is the daughter of former President Alberto Fujimori. She became First Lady at age 19 after her parents separated. She's had 3 failed presidential bids since 2011 and has now finally won. Her supporters say she's the leader the country needs to restore order, revive the economy and tackle rising crime. But her father was convicted of human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings and kidnappings. And Keiko Fujimori's critics worry she may reimpose the authoritarianism of her father's government. Like the elder Fujimori, she's also faced accusations of corruption, as well as money laundering allegations linked to her election campaigns. She denies any wrongdoing. Fujimori will inherit a deeply divided country. Peru has had 9 presidents in the past decade, many brought down by impeachments, resignations and corruption scandals. And Fujimori has been accused of being the architect of much of that instability. She narrowly won the election by fewer than 50,000 votes, but she's promised to unite the country.
A new stage begins, a new path, one that must be marked by progress, by peace, by the reconciliation of Peruvians, by restoring trust in our institutions, and by achieving the true inclusion of Peruvians who've historically been left behind and permanently forgotten.
Fujimori's election reflects a broader trend across Latin America. Peru joins a growing list of countries with right-wing leaders, including Argentina, El Salvador and Chile. They have sought closer ties with the United States, and so has Fujimori. But China is Peru's biggest trading partner, and Fujimori will need to balance relations with Beijing in any tilt towards Washington, while also managing a fractured society at home. Ragas, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all the issues that have been raised in that report with our panel of guests joining us on today's Inside Story. From Lima, the capital of Peru, we have José Ragas, a historian and assistant professor at the Catholic University of Chile. He's also the author of the Fujimori Years. From Andover in Connecticut, Renata Segura, Programme Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Crisis Group. And in London, Christopher Sabatini, Director of the Latin America Programme at Chatham House. Thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us. Let me start with you, Jose, because you are there in the Peruvian capital. The country gets its first, not female president, but first elected female president. That would be a big story in any country in the world, but in this country, the woman in question is arguably the best-known figure in Peruvian politics, who's been a public figure in the country for more than 30 years.
Yes, actually, she has a very long career. She started, as you said, as a as a first lady when she was just 19 years old, and she aligned with her father, and she defended her father, Alberto Fujimori, over the last years until he passed away. But there is not too much enthusiasm here in Peru, but with her being the first woman elected president, because she has a record of having supported the forced sterilizations in the 90s and not supporting especially women's agenda in the country.
Renata, the ninth president in a decade, that's a pretty remarkable indication of instability, extraordinary instability, is it not?
Yes, absolutely. By far the biggest instability in this sense in Latin America. And that the core of this instability has been this continuous fight between the executive and Congress. Congress in Peru has this incredible faculty to be able to get rid of the president merely by what they call moral incapacity. So it's a bar that is very low. And if you have a divided Congress, it's very easy to get rid of the president. This is going to be a little bit different with Keiko because she is the first president in recent history that has a bigger coalition supporting her in Congress. So maybe she will be the president that actually finishes her term.
But Christopher, she doesn't have a bigger margin of victory, really. It's still incredibly narrow. And one of the figures I was shocked by, one poll said 91% of Peruvians are dissatisfied, completely dissatisfied with democracy.
Yeah, Peru has been dealing for a long time, actually since the election of her father, Alberto Fujimori, with a collapsed party system. And with that, just declining levels of trust, abasement levels in terms of trust in the Congress, trust in the judiciary, and now faith in democracy. And for good reason. And the truth is Keiko Fujimori now for years has been leading this sort of scorched earth campaign from the Congress. And at the time, the Congress was a single chamber Congress. In this election, they've now have two chambers. They've reopened the Senate after a long time, after a constitution that eliminated it. But she's going to face a tough time because for many of the politicians and the political groupings that have sort of felt the brunt of her opposition and her scorched earth policies, this is going to be payback time. So while she has more of a lock on the Congress, she now has basically the president of the Senate is going to be of her party. It's going to be a very fractious delegation within both houses of Congress. And quite frankly, if you look at disapproval ratings, both of the candidates in this election had high disapproval ratings. This was basically what you call the lesser of two evils that many people were voting for.
Normally on this programme, I like to look to the future, not to the past. But I think to understand things, we do need to look a little bit more at the man that you've all mentioned, which is her father. Alberto Fujimori served as Peru's president from 1990 to 2000. He introduced free market economic reforms that some say helped stabilise the economy. Fujimori and his government were accused of widespread human rights abuses, including forcibly sterilising indigenous women, kidnappings and extrajudicial killings. Many of those abuses were linked to his government's fight against the Shining Path armed group. In 2000, he fled to Japan in the midst of a corruption scandal and later resigned by fax. 7 years later, he was extradited and convicted of rights abuses and corruption. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison only to be pardoned. Alberto Fujimori was released shortly before his death in 2024. Jose, it's very interesting looking at his record because it seems some of the country believe that he was a national saviour who got the country out of this deadly insurgency and turned around the economy. The other half of the country believe that he's a dictator convicted of appalling crimes. Is it possible both are true?
Actually, yes, and in the summary that you have introduced very well, I mean, there is this narrative that they are trying, that the members of the Fujimorista party, they are trying to present, saying that he was a savior of the country because he arrange the economy after a huge hyperinflation that we had in the 1980s. And actually, that he fought back against the Shining Path and other terrorist groups, and that they used that narrative in order to reduce all the opposition, especially in the three last elections that Keiko lost. No, but something happened in the last election where you had an opposition that couldn't manage that narrative, that it was a more disorganized opposition. So that allowed Keiko Fujimori to win in this fourth election. But actually, if you ask to the people who voted for Fujimori, they are going to repeat this narrative that he saved the country, that he arranged economy, and that his daughter is going to do the same for the country in the next years.
And Renata, she's certainly not distancing herself from her father in any way. She went to his grave on election day. It's worth reminding our viewers that she became the first lady after the collapse of her parents' marriage, when her mother was condemning her father and his government for corruption. She then took the mother's job and became the first lady at the age of 19, while a university student in the United States. Do you think she actually chose that or had no choice at the time?
I think probably she had no choice, but we have seen that Keiko is a very, very political person. She has been embedded in the politics of Peru for many, many years. I think something that was important in her father's term that was not mentioned by your summary is that he closed Congress, and he actually ruled by decree for quite an extensive period of time. And that was the first time that we saw in Latin America a right-wing president actually closing Congress and really destroying the sort of balance and checks and balances in his period, a president that had been elected democratically. So I think there is quite a bit of worry that authoritarian tendency that Alberto had, Keiko also embraces.
Christopher, you have close elections in lots of countries. The United States always has pretty close elections. But this country seems to be divided. It's on a complete knife edge. If I look at the most recent elections, 2016, 2021, and this election, 2026, there are 39 million people or so in Peru, and yet 41,000 votes, 44,000 votes, 49,000 votes, a tiny margin every single time.
Even more than the margin, actually, is what's at issue here is the divisions. And the other candidate, Sanchez, was very much of the left. He had been an acolyte of the former president, Luis Castillo, who had attempted also to dissolve the Congress. And so for many, he was seen as being a savior, someone who could sort of come in and reclaim what were many of the indigenous demands that many thought Castillo had represented. And when he was removed, it unleashed a wave of violence, primarily in the mountainous areas in the interior of Peru. So what we're seeing right now is, if you break down how Peruvians voted, besides that very slender margin that you mentioned, we're also seeing very distinct pockets of support. So it's largely in the rural indigenous in poor neighborhoods, mostly recent settlements around Lima and urban areas. But then it's largely mostly European descendant voters, mostly those in the middle and upper classes who voted for Keiko Fujimori. So, this is a real volatile situation beyond just the margin. It is a breakdown, or could represent a breakdown, given these levels of polarization in Peruvian society, should Keiko Fujimori pursue more of a campaign of, if you will, revenge, or should Sanchez's party do the same in the Congress, which, again, Keiko Fujimori has done now for years against her previous opponents.
So given all of that, Jose, go on, Renata, yeah.
No, I just wanted to add something to what Chris was saying that I think is very important, which is that not only was the margin between the two candidates very close, but the people who put her over the winning line were those Peruvians who live abroad. So for the first time, those Peruvians that voted inside the country actually elected Sanchez. And Fujimori is only president because those people who live in the diaspora. And I think we know that in Latin America, those people who live outside of the country tend to vote more to the right. And I think this is a very interesting case in which really the vote in the exterior shifted the decision in the elections.
So given all of that, Jose, ninth president in 10 years, what are her chances of survival?
Well, actually, the reason why there was 9 presidents in the past is because Keiko Fujimori, and because there is this ultra-conservative coalition that was ruling from the Congress, and with Keiko Fujimori behind that. So what maybe is going to happen here is going to be a more nuanced balance between the opposition and the Fujimoristas, as it happened yesterday at night when the Senate now is in control of the Fujimoristas and the lower chamber is in control of the opposition. But still, there is some kind of doubt about what's going to happen in the future, because one of the main reasons why the opposition they couldn't coalesce, I mean, in one a more effective group is because of the repression. Something that Renata and Christopher said is very important, because one of the main reasons why there is this divide in the country right now is not only in terms of Fujimoristas and anti-Fujimoristas, it's because the opposition is located in the southern regions, especially with the more indigenous presence, where the repression was totally brutal by the armed forces and the police, especially in the 2022 and 2023, after Pedro Castillo was revoked from power. No? So there is this, something that is happening right now in the capital city here is that you can see all the public spaces that are closed, for example, the Plaza Mayor and most of the major squares here in Lima, because they are feared that there is more mobilizations, that there are more opposition, and they are not going to allow the civil society to organize themselves in order to present a more united front for the next 5 years.
Christopher, what would you say are the major... Go on quickly, yeah.
Because what Jose just said is exactly the sort of prescription, if you will, for zero-sum politics. And that's driven Peruvian politics now for, as you mentioned, it for the last 10 years. But now it's become particularly sharp for the reasons that Jose just mentioned. The sense of exclusion, the sense of marginalization, the sense of people who don't have avenues within the institutions. Now, one interesting fact was in the first round of elections, there were more than 30 parties or 30 candidates on the ballot. People joke that it looked like actually a pizza box. The ballot was so wide. So that also means that Peruvians' identities are fragmenting, as is the party system, which will make it very difficult to govern, irrespective of what happened in the margins of the electoral victory.
Renata, the issues that matter to people that were driving the vote, clearly crime is one of them, from what I've been reading. Particularly these extortion cases, apparently up to 2,000 a month that are being reported now. In addition, you've got drugs, you've got cocaine, and of course, sticking with crime, you've got the crime that's at the top. You've got corruption. 4 former presidents are in prison. Another former president in 2019 shot himself as the police were coming to arrest him. Would you say crime is the number one issue? Because the economy is actually reasonably sound, is it not?
Yes, and it has always been reasonably sound in Peru in sort of a miraculous way, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think Peru, such as it's the case in Latin America overall, for the people, their everyday concern is really criminality or security. And we see this throughout the entire continent, in which even countries that are relatively peaceful in comparison to others with higher levels of violence still put security as their biggest concern. And I think the election of Keiko in this way responds very much to that fear. And it's something that we're seeing throughout the continent. That's the same thing that is happening right now in Colombia. The same thing that has happened in other countries like Ecuador, in Central America. People want candidates that promise that they're going to do a quick turnaround in security. Now, the question is, can they, right? A lot of these problems, a lot of the security issues that Latin America faces are deeply ingrained in the structures of the societies. And these iron fist policies, these promises such as the one that Keiko and others do of really being able to turn around things very quickly are in general not really effective. So she's going to have to really, live up to her promises in terms of being able to both limit normal crime like extortion and things that happen on a day-to-day, and wider organized crime. In Peru, for example, illegal economy is a huge problem, such as drug trafficking. So there's a lot of challenges that she's going to have to respond to quickly, and it's not going to be so easy for her.
So, Jose, regional issues, some of these that are matched in other countries. Are we now, is it fair to say, seeing a regional trend, a regional move to the right?
Yes, actually, there's this is a new trend. This is part of this trend that is happening in South America. For example, a few months ago, I live in Santiago de Chile, and Chileans voted for José Antonio Cast, which is in the right wing, and also in Colombia has won another right wing leader, and now Peru, and we can see how this coalition is gaining strength, right? But also there is something very I think it's important to say, because even before this coalition, this right-wing trend, Alberto Fujimori, he paved the way for this, because he also fostered a populist right movement in Peru. Also, and Renata said, he closed the Congress in order to break this balance between the Congress and the presidency, and he created all the conditions in order to concentrate power, as in order to gain a re-election and also to gain another re-election, even though it was illegal, right? So I think that we have to see this as it's correct, as a regional trend that is also aligned with the United States, with the part of the Shield of the Americas, and with the support of Trump and the support of the Homeland Security Department in the U.S. Actually, in the last election, the U.S. ambassador played an important role in this ballotage that allowed Keiko to win. So there have been some anomalies as part of this and intervention of the U.S., but also we have to see this as a long trajectory of how the populist right was trying to create this kind of support after the end of the Cold War, especially in the 90s, when there was this realignment of civil society, political forces, and the US and China relationship now, as it's happening in these years.
So, Christopher, let me ask you about that. How is the new president going to balance the US relationship with the China relationship? You've got a US that now is pursuing, it says, a new Monroe Doctrine, a sort of colonial role. It sees this region as its backyard. It doesn't like China there, and yet Peru has become China has become Peru's largest trading partner since 2011, including this very large deep water megaport that they are building 50 miles north of Lima.
This will be an issue. Now, first, I think the Trump administration has not been so vocal when a country's exports and its number one export market are destined to China. I think they understand in many ways that China does represent a source of economic growth and jobs, that the U.S., it's very much in the U.S.'s interest to stem the root causes of migration, and also create economic growth. So it's not so much the trade, and you're right. China is Peru's number one destination, primarily for the metals and minerals. It's one of the largest, third largest, I believe, copper exporter in the world. But what really drives the Trump administration's agenda or anti-China agenda are infrastructural outposts. And some shady deals that maybe China may have cut in some of these cases. So as you mentioned, the Shanghai port, which is, I believe, $3 billion investment by China, by Costco, they built the port, and then they also, in the contract, much to the surprise of even Peruvians, they did retain control over the port. And already Keiko Fujimori is sending signals that it may be time to reevaluate that contract. Much the same way, by the way, that happened in Panama when Donald Trump, in his inaugural speech, claimed rather outrageously that the U.S. was going to retake the Panama Canal, but then rather incorrectly also cited two supposed spy satellite stations that the Hong Kong company CK Hutchinson owned on either side of the canal. They were warehouses. They could have potentially been used for dual purpose, but they weren't being used as active spy satellites or destinations. So, but in the case of Shanghai, this is a large investment by Peru. It was intended, and by China, it was intended to be a major port for Peru, not just to China, but also from Brazil and other regional areas. It was going to be a hub even for Chilean exports. It remains to be seen how Keiko Fujimori can navigate this tension between the U.S.'s rejection of the Shanghai port, which according to even neutral sources says the Shanghai port is a deep water port, could be used as dual use. It could be used for military vessels, which obviously is alarming the United States and its own security. But how she's going to do this and not get the retribution of the Chinese, whether on reducing Peruvian imports of its metals and minerals that it depends on to China, or whether it will basically initiate some form of a diplomatic spat. And that's actually what we're seeing right now, by the way, between China and Panama. After the Panamanian Supreme Court rejected the treaties of those two warehouses I mentioned, Siki Hutchinson, China has been going after Panamanian flag vessels that are entering Chinese water space. So it's not going to be an easy, no pun intended, it's not going to be an easy waters to navigate.
Not easy to navigate that, Renata. Briefly, also, the trade issues between the US and Peru. They did have a US-Peru trade promotion agreement, got rid of most tariffs. Trump's just days ago slapped 12.5% tariffs back on. That's a difficult issue for her on day one, is it not?
It is a very difficult issue, and obviously it's a policy that a lot of people have criticized on the on the side of the U.S. because it makes very difficult for the governments in Latin America to actually cut those ties with China that Chris was referring to. And I don't know if you might have seen the op-ed that President Lula from Brazil published yesterday in the U.S. Newspaper, in which he was saying to the U.S., if you are going to impose these crazy tariffs on us, we have no choice but to look for other markets. And he didn't say the word China, but it was very much implicit that that is the case. Yeah. So the U.S. has done this thing in the first Trump administration. It really removed from the region. China came in and said, oh, you're not getting the loans that you need to build the ports, the roads, we will provide them. You know, there were funny deals around them because that is how these things operate. And now that the U.S. is back, it is putting Latin America in a very difficult position, because if you're going to be both demanding that you cut your ties with China, but simultaneously imposing tariffs on your exports to the U.S., it's really leaving very little wiggle room for the Latin Americans to actually be able to do what would make President Trump happy. So Keiko and many other presidents on the same boat right now.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you to our guests today, Jose Ragas, Renata Segura, and Christopher Sabatini. Remember, this programme is also available on our website, aljazeera.com. As ever, we want to hear from you. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or look for us on X. There we are, at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the team here, that's it for now, but stay tuned. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in just a moment.